Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Welcome to the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Kathleen Carroll-Wray. She's a licensed clinical psychologist and registered yoga instructor. Dr. Carroll-Wray specializes in psychological assessment and mind-body psychotherapy for children, adolescents, and adults. She works with individuals ages 3 through 25 who are managing learning difficulties, ADHD, autism, grief, trauma, anxiety, self-esteem concerns, and life transitions. Dr. Carroll-Wray is also the co-host of the Holisticology podcast, where she discusses mental health and wellness. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Carroll-Wray.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be included. Thank you.
I'm so glad to have you here as well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Like I always say, I think we're all doing the best that we can. We're in the midst of this 2020 pandemic, and there's so much going on. And again, we're just trying to find ways to manage it all.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So love to talk about that.
Yes. And so many of the families, I mean, you and I both do assessments and evaluations. So we work with kids who often come to us because they're struggling with learning, processing challenges. But what we often see, and you've probably seen this in your practice as well, is that there is also a lot of anxiety that we come across. A lot of anxiety, some self-concept issues. And we know that worry has a purpose, right? Worry has a purpose. It keeps us alert, keeps us aware of danger. But when it's too much, it can be problematic. And I'd love to start there and talk about anxiety, because I think that there's a lot of it going on right now. And I think probably for kids, the distance learning adds another layer of anxiety.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much anxiety going on, and there's all the worries that we're so aware of that are so present and easy to pinpoint and pin down. And then all of that anxiety that's less obvious or clear. And that's something that I think about a lot when I'm working with families, is also noticing, spending all this time on the computer, or also earlier today, we used the phrase Groundhog Day to kind of describe how our lives are becoming so routine, and how there's inherent mindfulness to that, but almost in an anxiety-inducing way of like, oh boy, we're going to do the same thing. I can predict what's going to happen. I'm worried about different points in my day and what might happen. And so there's all of these different factors that are just really escalating it as well.
Absolutely. And what you're describing is that anticipatory anxiety. And I hear that from some parents who are, they know that their kids are about to go into that Zoom call, and they know that it's going to be a struggle, and the anxiety starts to, upregulate, right? They start to experience it and feel it. And, I talked about this before on another episode, is that kids pick up on parent anxiety, and that can often exacerbate their own anxiety that they're also experiencing, right? So we have to target both the parent anxiety and the child anxiety.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a lot of what I think about as well. And I love hearing you say that, because I think there's this difficult relationship between just being aware that kids are always learning from that modeling, and they're also picking up on so much that's happening around them. But also, I'm so aware of extra these days is that kind of parents are in almost like, I'm trying to think of a good, maybe you can help me out, just they're being watched all the time. It's really, really hard. So that's going to escalate anxiety and feelings almost of shame as well. Like, I have to do everything so well. And then that increases anxiety. So there's just so much. It feels like there's so much opportunity right now for compassion
Right. Absolutely. And I love that you said that compassion. It's so needed right now. I mean, parents need self-compassion and we need to teach our kids that self-compassion. And I have a lot of compassion for the teachers who are struggling with managing, classrooms full of kids who have different abilities and different access to different levels of Wi-Fi, to their own responses to distance learning. It's a challenge for so many people right now. And I love that your practice focuses on overall well-being, right? And so we're not just specifically targeting, let's just deal with the anxiety that you're experiencing, or let's just deal with the ADHD symptoms that you have. Let's find a way to promote overall well-being. Can you talk about that? Because I love that approach.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. So kind of nested within context. So it's possible to approach a goal so specific like anxiety or ADHD symptoms, but within context. And so that's the thing that I love about mindfulness and integrating mindfulness into treatment. And so is this kind of a good place to kind of bring it in?
Yes, this is perfect.
Okay.
I want to go there because oftentimes mindfulness is one of the things I often recommend because there's so much literature on its helpfulness, but so many people don't know what it is.
Right.
So I would love you to start there by just, since you're going to jump into mindfulness, tell us what it is, and then we'll talk about how it works and who it helps.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And I'll appreciate your direction. So I think the first part is just noticing. So mindfulness is just bringing attention. And I think a key component to that is non-judgmental attention. So bringing attention, even if I say to the two of us right now to bring attention to the present moment of our conversation and any kind of sensations, that could be, you talked about anxiety, that can bring anxiety into your present awareness. And we're so used to avoiding that and immediately attributing some kind of a belief or behavior or something attached to that. So it's the very basic is just bringing attention to this is happening. This is our present moment. And so one of the things that I talk about with folks when we're starting to engage in therapy or treatment together is to start noticing behaviors. So for folks who are listening who might be more, I think CBT has just become a type of therapy that a lot of people are more familiar with. So it's kind of an easy way to describe it. It's just noticing behaviors. So that could be a first step. And then noticing what we feel about the behavior. So if it's a parent, it might be our teacher, just noticing, okay, I'm most concerned when this child is engaging in maybe like a reflexive no or something like that, like saying no all the time to everything. That's a behavior that I'm noticing. And I want to just get curious about it instead of judging myself or judging the child but just bringing attention. And then CBT has some kind of nice language around other steps. So then noticing maybe what was happening before and maybe what's happening after it. But the mindfulness piece is just working on bringing that to awareness without judgment and without immediately rushing to this is what I'm going to do about it.
Right. And I think that non-judgment piece is so important that a lot of people aren't aware that that's part of mindfulness, because the first thing when you get a thought, then you want to do something about it, or I shouldn't be thinking about that. I should be focusing on my mindfulness, but now I'm worried about these other 3 things that I have to do before the end of the day. And should I really be doing this and spending my time? So I think that non-judgment piece is so important. And the noticing that you're not acting on it. You're just noticing that you're having these thoughts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I appreciate that. That was so well reflected. That's exactly what I'm thinking.
And so does it matter how much time? I hear this a lot from parents. Does it matter how much time I engage in these mindfulness exercises? Should it be an hour a day? Should it be every day? Is 10 minutes enough? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I think when people ask that question, the first thing I try to do is kind of model it in the moment a little bit. So just what's coming up as we're talking about how much time should be attributed to that. So just noticing like any thoughts that come along with that of, okay, so is there a supposed to? Like, am I supposed to be noticing every time my child has this behavior? Am I supposed to, be doing mindfulness right? Or is there a way? And so even just taking an opportunity, maybe this is like a first appointment, and just to practice that together, because there is no clear answer for that. And it's really what's going to work for you and your family. Maybe you notice it like one time between sessions, and that's okay. We can use that as one example. Or maybe something where now you've heard about this and you're thinking about it, and you'll start to notice it, but then it'll be like almost too much. Like now I'm thinking about this every time. So for families who want a structure, I provide kind of like a chart. So it's like a tracking system of like, this is what we're noticing. This is what's happening before or after, for people who are comforted by the structure. And for people who are like, I just don't have time. I just want to start this, but I don't want it to be something that takes over my life. That's absolutely fine. And it's okay to just start with that mindful noticing whenever it happens.
Right. And I think what some parents have also said is that they've heard there are different types of mindfulness. And obviously we don't have time to go over every single type, but they've heard of things like mindful eating and mindful walking. So when you're engaging in mindfulness, should parents sit in a place on the floor that's quiet? Should they sit with their feet on the ground? Is it okay to be laying in bed? Like, what are some thoughts on kind of the mechanics of the mindfulness exercise?
I love that so much. I love that so much because I think what's beautiful about mindfulness is you can, and I'm being a little abstract because you can do this anywhere, but I love mindfulness exercises because I think it's so grounding and it's such a self-gift. So one of the things that in working this way and in research in the past and things, one of the things that maybe people don't think about that much that I'll bring in is creating this space. So mindfulness, like maybe you've become aware of, I know we've been talking about child's behaviors, but the child's behaviors, but maybe your own. Like I'm noticing that I get really tired by 3 p.m. or something like that. And maybe just starting to notice your physical space that you're in. So like your desk, and creating, a chair that you enjoy sitting in, something that's going to be grounding to all of the senses. So you can engage in mindful eating anytime you eat. You could, and in this way, all you have to do, a cheat sheet is just to kind of think about all of the senses available to you. So taste and sound, texture, like any of those kinds of things. But I do think it's helpful to, as a starting place, think about how to give yourself as much energy as you possibly can to engage in this. And there are all those like little things that take away your energy. I keep mentioning the chair, maybe because my chair isn't that comfortable, but that is definitely kind of takes away from the experience, or it's something that you become mindful of, and then you're drawn into that experience, and that's okay too.
Okay. So it sounds like you can be flexible with it in terms of what it looks like, because for some parents it can be, I just got home from the office. I'm going to just sit in my car for 5 minutes and just pay attention to the sounds around me, my breathing, all of those things before I walk into the house. For others, it might be, I'm going to go into a specific room in my house every morning before I start making the kids breakfast, and engage in this, again, this noticing and breathing and non-judgment.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm paying attention to the things around me including the sensations that I'm experiencing in my body.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I love that kind of like carving out the time and the space, which I think is so beautiful. And I think especially at the beginning, it's like any new behavior, it can be practiced intentionally and become part of the routine. And then eventually, once you start to practice mindfulness in that structured way, you do notice that you can bring it into other places where it's like, okay, I've practiced, because there are all kinds of YouTube audios and all these things that you can do if you want something kind of guiding you through this process. But then later on, when you're throughout the rest of your day, able to start noticing things like, I noticed earlier today when I was sitting in the car that my jaw was more relaxed and my stomach had like more space. And right now I'm noticing that feeling again while I'm sitting with my kid on the couch or something like that. And it's like, my body's telling me something. And that's a very grounding in itself as a cue.
Right. And we both work with kids. And can you talk a little bit about how mindfulness is helpful to kids who might be struggling with emotion regulation, attention issues, anxiety, which is where we started the discussion? How is it helpful for them?
Okay. So how is it helpful? I think a lot of the way that I tend to work, especially with younger kids, is first with that parent modeling. So we might engage in a really intentional activity, like what you're describing. So it might be that we're sitting together and maybe it's a breathing exercise, or maybe it's more of a movement-based exercise, but something that the child enjoys and already has some buy-in for. So it's something you can incorporate into play. There are all kinds of ways, but let's say I'm just picturing right now a couple of specific folks in a moment recently with a parent and a child where we were engaging in a mindful breathing exercise. And so the really key component was being able to create that space for the parent, exactly like we're talking about, like having that moment where the parent is able to engage in some mindful breathing. And so we'd start off by sitting together and then engaging in something sensory. So with kids, often doing like, let's take a deep breath together can be great, but often they need more imagination involved. And we'll ground to that. And you watch the parent delight in it as well. It's such a beautiful experience to be able to sit together and mindfully notice air coming in, and maybe it's like green air, and maybe we add a scent to it, like a scent that they like I don't know, mint or something, or even cookies, whatever, going in and passing all the way through, filling up the belly, and then expelling kind of like charcoal air, like kind of something, giving some kind of visual that different kids have different things they like, coming back out the same way, and being able to have both the parent experience that emotional regulation. So what they're seeking in their child, instead of saying like, you go take a deep breath,
Right.
go to your mindful corner or whatever, but like having that moment for themselves, because it's such a good feeling and we all deserve it. And so being able to have that, and then the child being able to kind of delight in that with their parent, it can be a pretty amazing experience.
Right. And I love that the parent-child engaging the exercise together, because not only, you've got the modeling of the parent for the child, but then it also seems like it would be an opportunity to build connection between the two as well. Particularly when kids are dysregulated, oftentimes that can cause friction in the parent-child relationship. And this is an opportunity for them to come together and connect in that moment, to engage in this exercise.
So true. So true. I love that. And parts of the way that I think about it clinically, going off of that, are first starting with sensory regulation. So grounding skills involving breathing and things like this, in order to have the capacity to do some more emotional identification work. And so with a parent and child, we might build off of that breathing and actually do like yoga poses together, or something where the child and the parent, even I can model a bit, like, let's make up a pose for how we're feeling right now. So, because the even being able to verbally say, I'm sad, or like communicate that with your facial expressions is awesome. But there's such an opportunity for empathy when your parent says, like, their pose is lying down on the ground and saying, like, I'm exhausted.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
The kid is like jumping up and down and saying, like, my pose is up here, and they're able to see where they're at with each other and have that opportunity together in order to not only identify their emotion, but then be able to communicate it to one another in that mindful way.
Right. That's beautiful. It's beautiful what you've described. And, when you talk about mindfulness, you talk a lot about breathing. And I love the example that you gave about, oftentimes parents will say, okay, go in the corner and breathe, or go to your mindfulness corner. But, we often say, just take a deep breath, just take a deep breath. So what should breathing look like? So sometimes parents don't know, what should that look like? What should I be modeling for my child in terms of breathing? Because some kids, if they're really amped up, they can be breathing really quickly and in and out and in and out. So how do you guide them through the breathing that you need them to do in order to downregulate their nervous system? Because that's really what breathing does.
Yes, absolutely. And I love what you described. And again, tying it back into anxiety, because that's just kind of a nice theme for this. But for take a deep breath, sometimes, again, I keep going back to, but being able to practice it yourself before you offer it to a child, because a lot of us, when we take a deep breath, it actually just sits in our lungs and doesn't actually make its way into the diaphragm. And this can be a space where it's actually activating for anxiety and kind of kicking up that fight or flight response. And so sometimes people will say, I tried deep breathing, I didn't like that. And I'll ask, can you show me what a deep breath looks like? And I can model it too. But practicing first, just allowing your breath to be natural, no judgment. What does my breath look like? And then getting curious about, can you send that air down? Can you take up more space? Can your balloon get bigger? And then kind of if you picture like a balloon with a pin, like a slow leak, that would be ideal, because that would be especially calming to the nervous system. But yeah, so taking a deep breath, you can show your child, watch, we'll take a deep breath together, and really filling up that balloon and then letting it go. And it can even be fun. So if it's something you practice together, take a deep breath and green air in. I know I keep using these examples, but what it can even be an opportunity for fun and diffusion. When the child's super activated and there's both the breath component, but maybe a little distraction could be a little helpful. That can be a nice way of doing it.
And that's where that visualization and that imagination comes in.
Yeah.
Particularly when you're working with little kids. And I love that example of the breathing in the cookie, the smell of the cookies, right?
Exactly.
So, if parents were engaging in this mindfulness, they were modeling it for their children, the children were also engaging in these mindfulness practices. What are some benefits that you would expect to see on the other end? And obviously it'll differ in terms of what that might look like or how long it might take, but what are some things that they should expect if they're kind of incorporating this into either their overall well-being plan or incorporating into their treatment plan for ADHD or anxiety? What can they expect to see? How would it be helpful?
So this is a skill. It's a simple skill, but it's also incredibly effective. And I think sometimes people get a little nervous about things that are that seems kind of easy.
Yes.
Well, isn't that great? Right? Yes. So the mindfulness skills, ideally a child will be able to, before getting to a 10, let's say a 10 is where we're seeing the behaviors that are really extreme, the parent or teacher and child can together learn to identify when we're at a 5, because they're building these skills of being able to say and self-advocate by labeling experiences that they're having. So emotions or thoughts that they're having, that's part of mindfulness. But then also, so hopefully they'll be able to, one of the outcomes would be to be able to tell you before they're getting to that 10 place. The breath work, I think of as twofold. So not only as a beautiful skill in the moment, so we practice it, first off, practicing this skill when a child is super activated for the first time is not necessarily the most ideal time. So practicing it first in a neutral time or even fun. But then you can encourage first for the child, when you're noticing okay, this might be a good opportunity for a deep breath. They're talking a mile a minute and maybe their thoughts are going all over the place, or they're having trouble with impulse control. Taking a deep breath would be an opportunity to intervene. But then eventually they'll have practiced that. They'll have learned from you to pair okay, I'm feeling this way. I'm doing these things. This is a skill I can use in those moments, and they'll start to do it on their own. So what I love is that some kids have been practicing this by the time they're older and in their teen years, and I can offer this, and it's something that's not even that unfamiliar. And we're able to then build on those skills at later times in development, where maybe we're tuning more into physiological sensations and understanding how anxiety or attention concerns are playing out in the body, and those things that are a little bit more advanced, but they're primed beautifully. So twofold, because we're talking about dispositions or diagnoses that have a lifelong trajectory. So it's skills that we can impart early on to keep falling back on as we're learning more and more skills going through life.
That's wonderful. That's really great. And, I love what you said about, again, tying back in that noticing. And it sounds like when you're you're at a 5, you described a 5, and then that a 10 is possible because you've seen it before, that when you're at a 5, that you can notice where you are. So again, using those skills, as you described, of noticing and then choosing that as a time to maybe engage in that breathing to kind of, again, bring the nervous system down so that you don't escalate to a 10. But it starts with noticing where you are.
Exactly. Yes.
It's fabulous. And it's something that people have access to. I mean, there's so much research. So it's not just something that people believe will work. There's research to support that this does in fact improve outcomes for kids with anxiety and emotional regulation issues and ADHD, who are struggling with distractibility and impulse control, like you described. So there's evidence and research to support that this is helpful, but it's also incredibly accessible, that you don't have to. I mean, therapy, obviously, we know the benefits of therapy, but this is something that they can access in the moment, at home, on a regular basis, and reap the benefits in real time. Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that I'm always so jazzed about it. I always want to talk a bit about how this can be something, I think initially when people start this and try it, it's understandable. It can be a little scary. Parent modeling child alike, it can be a little scary to tune into your body because we spend most of our days in our heads, So even taking a deep breath and noticing it the first time, it's okay for that to be a little bit, and it would be expected for that to be a little unfamiliar, or it just can be an experience. And so it's okay to practice it and start to get, again, just if nothing else from this podcast, non-judgment.
Right. Non-judgment. And it's a skill. And like with any other skill, you need to practice it.
Right.
And keep doing it in order to kind of reap the benefits that go along with that. And so you are a clinical psychologist and a yoga instructor. And it seems that those two experiences would inform the work that you do.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yes, because you described the yoga poses. Do you use some of your experiences in yoga to inform your clinical work? And what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think of the deep breath work as like a gift. There was a kid I worked with who put it so well. He talked about it as like spa time, because we created like a corner for him that had, the aroma machine and the snuggles and the thinking putty and all this stuff. Right. And that when we do breath work together or relaxation poses or things, that it's like, it can be spa time, and our lives are so hectic and this work is difficult. And there's a lot of stress and opportunity for pain. But this is really a place where we can craft or cut out that time. And from all ages, everyone deserves that minute for themselves, for a breath. And so, yeah, I think that's one component. It's just the relaxation tools. But then also, I'm a huge believer in empathy through movement. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for showing, because our behavior, we can't see each other's emotions. We see our behaviors. As a psychologist, that's what we're always thinking about. But you can provide additional insight by sharing, like, this is what I'm feeling like in my body right now, and making it a little silly and fun. But that is so clear. When I talk about, like, I feel like I have a weight on my shoulders and I communicate that, it's a different way of sharing what it feels like to be sad or to feel stressed.
Yeah. And I love the idea of empathy, because it's so important, especially now when that's kind of like people are having a lot of discussions on empathy and what that should look like. And when you describe the two different yoga poses, the mom laying flat on the ground and the child jumping in the air, being aware of the differences. I don't feel like that. How great for you that you have all this energy, but all mine is depleted.
Right, exactly.
That also helps parents and children to be aware of the different experiences that we have. And that's important, particularly for kids who are struggling, because oftentimes they're struggling. They're trying so hard to pay attention if they've got attention issues, and they feel like no one else has this struggle. And so when someone says, this must be really hard for you, it's really hard for you to focus, that must be really frustrating. That is a gift that you're giving them, because then they feel like they're being heard and they're being seen. And I love how you can model that through your body poses for kids who may not pick up on the subtle nuances of those, those social cues.
Right. Exactly. Because a lot of my interest in this was initially with using this with kids who have autism and have so many different needs in terms of learning these skills, but finding that it's helpful for so many other kids too, to be able to identify how others are feeling in their body, how they're feeling in theirs. And then as a psychologist, I can observe that and create the space for them to process that together. Because maybe the kid feels bad, like, oh, you're tired because of me, or vice versa. Like the parent is like, oh, I want to be up there with you. I'm feeling bad that I can't, or whatever it is. And then that's where we kind of shifted, not necessarily away from yoga, but definitely into therapy.
Right. I mean, there's so many benefits to everything that you've described. And it kind of reminds me of Daniel Siegel's, the healthy mind platter, where you're making time for all of these things that promote overall well-being, that downtime, that mindfulness time, and that connection time are also important to, being healthy individuals. And there are some individuals where mindfulness might not be enough and it'll help, but they need something more. And so reaching out to someone like you who can provide, therapeutic services. You talked about CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. And some people might need something more than just mindfulness or need something in addition to the mindfulness. So it's wonderful that they can go for additional support if they need it. So if individuals are listening to this and they've said, I've tried mindfulness and it works a little, but they may need something more. I think it's important for us to let people know that for some, mindfulness isn't enough and the breathing isn't enough, that they may need some professional services to really address things that they're dealing with and struggling with.
Exactly. Like I think of it as just one of the many skills, right? It's one way, one road in and a skill, but there are still so many other components that go into supporting a child's development. I mean, there's just endless, but this is just one thing.
I know we're about to wrap up, but right now I can't help but think about the fact that we're in the midst of what some people would describe as multiple pandemics. There's a lot going on, from the COVID-19 pandemic to social justice issues to political issues, and it's taking a toll on a lot of parents who maybe you have initially pre-COVID, maybe you were just trying to manage your child's attention issues or anxiety, but now you have to manage that in the context of these multiple pandemics. And now you're also managing distance learning, maybe caring for elderly parents. What are some recommendations that you have for parents who are trying to manage it all? Obviously, self-compassion. It sounds like self-compassion is going to be number one, that there's not one thing that you can do that's going to make everything better. So what are some things that you recommend for parents who are overwhelmed and trying to figure out how to manage it all? What are some things that they can do?
I think you hit on something so important. I think how I feel is I don't want to right now it is so much and so dysregulating that I'm very hesitant to add things in right now. And that's where I'm falling a lot back on mindfulness, actually. But if you're going to add something in, please, self-compassion.
Yes. Yes.
Please let that be the thing that you add in, and that will have an impact on your family as well. It's not just for you. It's okay if that's too much to have compassion for yourself. Have it for everyone around you, but please add that in. And I think a lot of it is also, if there is a bit of time, to look at the existing schedule and become mindful of the energy. Because what's really difficult is that maybe preferred activities for your child, your different children, there's a lot to juggle, but what brings energy and what takes it down. So I think a lot about, there's a principle in psychology of basically your preferred activities can be reinforcing. So you don't have to add new things in necessarily, but becoming aware of what times in the day are especially draining, what activities are associated with that. And can some things be flexible? Can some things be flipped around? Virtual schools are being, in some ways, there is not much flexibility. And then in others, there can be, depending on the school, in terms of when certain activities get done, and how can the day be structured in a way that's going to give you even a tiny bit more room in your cup. And that's something I think a lot of people, as we go on autopilot, just being mindful and taking a moment to look at what the day actually looks like, what needs to get done, what can be let go, and then within what needs, where are we going to have some fun? What's going to bring energy? And then can we put that after something that just has to get done, but no one wants to do it? That kind of stuff. But playing with the existing limitations. But again, I just think it's really tough. It's really tough times, and to be super compassionate and gentle, and not expecting too much of yourself.
Absolutely. I love that. I think that's great. I just love this conversation because there's so much great information for parents. And just, I think, again, to know that what you've described in terms of mindfulness, and you've described it so beautifully, and it's really the gift of breath. When I hear you talking, I think about the gift of breath, and that's something that we can give ourselves right now at a time when there's a lot we don't have control over and a lot that is happening to us, that we can give ourselves the gift of breath, even if it's 5 minutes in your car before you get into the house, or 5 minutes sitting on the edge of your bed when you're getting ready to start the day, to just meet yourself where you are and then just begin the day, and know that, over time, as you're building the skill, that you're really going to reap the benefits of this learned activity. So this is wonderful. I have absolutely loved this conversation with you. It is so great. And it's a great refresher course for me, and for reminding, okay, this is so fabulous. And so I appreciate you bringing the wealth of knowledge and the expertise and all this information that's so helpful to so many people at a really difficult time. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
And if people want to reach out to you and get in touch with you, listen to your podcast, I'm going to put a link to your podcast in the show notes, because you have great episodes, and there's one on mindfulness, there's one on breathing, and I want to make sure that I connect people to that who want to go a little bit deeper and learn a little bit more. But what is the best way for people to get in contact with you?
I would say my website is Carroll-Wray Psychological Services, 2 R's, 2 L's. But that tends to be, I have all of my contact information there, and I'm happy with any forms of communication.
Wonderful.
Email, anything.
Great. And I will put a link to your website in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for this conversation. It has been wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful being your colleague, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Me too. So thank you.
Dr. Carroll-Wray shared some great information about mindfulness and how it helps individuals who are experiencing anxiety, having trouble with focus, difficulties with emotional regulation, or impulse control. She also shared how breathing helps to regulate the nervous system. If you found this information helpful, please let me know. DM me on Instagram. And also, if you're so inclined, please leave a review and tune in next week. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.